Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I know people are probably going to come in as we go. I'll let people join. I see some attendees. Oops. Let me just fix Facebook Live. Okay. Great. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Welcome to our live call with Christina Blacken today, where we're going to talk about racial bias, creativity, and starting a business that changes the world. I'm so excited to see who's joining live. Hi there, Susie. Really good to see you on here. Hi, Leah. Some logistics before we get started. We're recording the call, and I'll make sure to make this available for you all after. Feel free to share any questions that you have in the chat or in the Q&A box. We are doing this call through Zoom, but also making it available through Facebook Live for the Work Bigger community only. So there is a slight delay over there. So if you can join through Zoom, that's great. But if not, and you join through Facebook Live, that's fine as well. We'll make sure to try to get to your questions later. Hi, Tara. Welcome. Love seeing everyone who's joining live. So for those of you who are new to Work Bigger, I'm Belma McCaffrey, the CEO and the founder, and everything that we do here is about challenging the status quo and redefining work. So that work is a vehicle for creativity, change, and living a better life. We do this in three ways. First, our programming. We have a personalized, high-impact online program that helps you find work you love and make a difference in the world without burning out. That's super important. And this program is an intensive course where you work with a coach one-on-one and in a group setting to get clear on your goals and then execute on those goals. Community is super, super important. We have a super engaged and close-knit group of ambitious women who have shared values around challenging the status quo and raising our collective consciousness. And then we have our content. We have a content platform, which right now is on belmamccaffrey.com, where we share resources and articles on redefining work. So part of our content is the Work Bigger story series, where we feature women who are mission driven, and they're really changing the world in a number of ways. Some are launching their own businesses, others are redefining work altogether by creating a career on their own terms, and others are aligning with organizations that are changing the world. So today we're interviewing Christina Blacken, who is the founder of The New Quo and a strategy director at Gizmodo. We did an interview on the blog with Christina, which we shared yesterday, but now we want to bring her interview to life and also have her connect with you all as much as possible, because we have a great community, and making other women who are pursuing their goals and leading from a mission-driven place available and accessible as possible is a big focus for Work Bigger. So welcome, Christina. I'm so excited to have you here and have been so looking forward to this call.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here, and also to see my hair on camera. I'm like, ooh.
It looks fabulous. I love it. Why don't you just start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your background, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I am originally from Utah, which I know is a bit of a shock. A lot of people are like, there's Black people out there? And I'm like, yes, me and my cousins and my mom. But my family was originally from the South, and they have a history of sharecropping and essentially the story of the Great Migration that happened in the U.S. for a lot of Black families, where they went out west to look for opportunity and to kind of get some space to be able to establish themselves and build a bit more of freedom, essentially, in their lives. So I learned a lot from that transition from my family, and was in a place where I had to be really comfortable with being the only woman, the only Black person, the only person who may not be a Mormon. There are a lot of Mormons in Utah. So that was really, I think, formidable for my personality and my strengths, as well as some of the struggles that I went through growing up. And then I got at the time I was pretty active in the Baptist church in Utah, and one of my preachers came up to me and she said, you know that there's this business program in New York that I think you'd be a good fit for. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's random, but sure, I'll check it out. And it was essentially called LEAD, which was a leadership program for African Americans to go to Ivy League schools around the country and just get access and exposure to, schools and networks they typically wouldn't. And I applied last minute. It was like one day before the deadline, didn't think I would get it. And I ended up getting accepted, and my program was at Cornell University. And I didn't know what Cornell was or what the prestige or status of that school was. I'm like, oh, this is a cute state school. This will be fun for the summer. So I went over there in my junior year of high school and just loved it and fell in love with the campus and, you know, upstate New York, and decided to go there for college. So I applied later and did all that stuff on my own. I was working part-time in high school, 20 hours a week. And I was also a cheerleader and had a lot of activities. So it was a lot, and I just figured it out and ended up getting into Cornell, which was great. And that's how I ended up on the East Coast, really. I was just like, well, I guess I'm going to go to New York. I don't know anybody. I have no friends or family. I have all my, you know, belongings packed into 2 suitcases, including a printer and a comforter. You know, if you ever need packing tips, I'm an expert packer. And just started on this journey of trying to find my way on the East Coast. And then from there, I moved to New York City because I had 2 options: go back to Mormonville and Coyotes and the mountains, which really didn't have a lot of opportunity in terms of jobs, or, you know, go to New York City, which felt like there would be just a wider array of things for me to try. So I decided to come down to New York City. I've lived here now for almost 8 years and started out in the law world. And that was kind of an interesting feat because I thought I would change the world one legal brief at a time. That wasn't really the case. And from there, just sort of transitioned through various industries, trying them out, really trying to figure out how to make an impact and do it in a way that I felt really was valuable and aligned with things that I believed in, and ended up in the media world where I am at currently. And I'm a director of strategy for the West and Midwest for Gizmodo Media Group, which used to be Gawker Media. And I also, you know, do the New Quo on the side, which is a platform about diversifying who and what we think is creative. So it's all about storytelling and media and how do we change behavior and as well as perspective through those tools.
Yeah, that's perfect. So now I want to jump basically directly to your mission. Can you share a little bit more about what your mission is?
Yeah, so I stumbled across a statistic a couple of months ago that was about creativity, which really shocked me and kind of made me think about how we really need to change the conversation. And Adobe had done a huge survey of working professionals, and I think it was 5 major developed countries, about their attitudes on creativity. And they found that 75% of people don't think that they'll ever reach their creative potential, which is really disturbing because most children rank really high on creativity. And it's something that's innate. We explore and we're curious, and that's how we learn the world as we are born and grow older. But then there's something in that process and in that sort of trajectory into adulthood that changes our perspective on our own creativity and what it means. And so seeing that, I was like, wow, how are we solving problems or finding creative fulfillment or doing self-expression if so many people feel this major block of even accessing something that feels like it's an innate part of the human experience, which is creating. So from there, I was just like, how do we talk about this differently? A lot of the things out there around creativity kind of fall into 2 camps. It's either super elitist, artistic, you know, beauty and celebrating the art world and art culture, which I think is amazing. And I'm a big fan of that. But there's also the other side, which is a bit more DIY and finger painting and for kids. And there's not really anything in between when it comes to the everyday application of what it means to think, to be creative, to look at the world with a creative perspective. And so that's really where the New Quo kind of evolved into, which is really changing how we talk about creativity and making it more accessible to people in their day-to-day lives. The examples of creativity and innovation being more diverse, because a lot of the time when we do talk about those things, it's usually a certain demographic or which can be problematic in a number of ways. And also just really showing people that they can cultivate that in their day-to-day and gain a ton of benefits outside of just self-expression from creativity. You can get mental health benefits and clarity and stability, find purpose in your work, solve really big social problems, and we're facing plenty of those, as you guys have seen probably in the news cycle, as well as just finding connection and community through your creative expression. So all those things really are what the mission of the New Quo is about, which is giving tips, information, inspiration, and stories around how to cultivate those things in your day-to-day.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. I'm actually curious who on the call and in our community identifies as creatives, because I agree with you. I think we narrowed that definition so much, but I think creativity is a key skill that we need, especially in the future of work and starting to solve and tackle a lot of the big problems that we have in the world. So would love to hear from our community, whether you're on Zoom or on Facebook Live. Definitely share how you view yourself. Christina and I would love to hear it. And then on the other side of that, Christina, I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think happens from childhood to adulthood where we start to lose that sense of creativity, right? Like we're so in touch with it when we're younger, but then something happens where we lose that connection. Oh, I think we have a slight tech delay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can. Your screen is frozen, but we can hear you.
Sorry, this Wi-Fi is a little spotty.
No worries.
First when we're here, curiosity and really just exploring to explore is encouraged because you learn so much. There isn't any right way to do anything to get to it, right? You're playing with blocks, stereo dolls, or you're coloring all of this. I make visible to occupy your time and to learn more about yourself. And then as we get older in the school system, we're sort of taught to a particular set of rules, a certain kind of paradigm. So you stop being trained to do this. It's really about memorization and repeating those things back, and not the foundations in any subject, but this sort of curiosity and openness is really stunted in school settings because there just isn't the time or space with the type of testing they have, as well as goals that we're setting for kids. So that's a huge part of it. I think there's also a conversation of, if you're not Picasso or Rima, you shouldn't do things because you're not the sort of clips, and
I think
if you're not
losing
talented in things. Can you hear me now?
Let's see. Hello?
Hello? I can see you.
Okay. I'm going to put myself on mute just in case it helps.
Okay. Hear me okay? Okay. But yeah, so if you don't have talent in those areas, then you're kind of told to stop pursuing it and stop investing in it. And, obviously, if you're not a singer, that's fine. That doesn't mean you have to go out and do karaoke or go on, America's Got Talent or anything like that. I think the idea of pursuing something because you're passionate about it and it helps you to process and understand the world is something we should continue to encourage in kids and not have them cast it aside because it doesn't have some exact immediate end goal or if they're not exactly, expertly talented in it. So I think those two sorts of attitudes are really what kills a lot of creativity as kids get older. And then as adults, we're sort of trained to be fearful of putting things out there if we're going to fail or if people are going to judge it. So we stop doing those things. We stop putting ourselves out there because we're worried about the backlash and the judgment and the concern of not being an expert. And you can't be an expert in something that you don't ever try. You're always, even, like I was saying, Jay-Z, he probably was a terrible rapper when he first started, right? Like it's probably nursery rhymes for all we know. And you build up over time and get better as you continue to practice something. I always say it's kind of like if we expected human beings to be born out of the womb walking and talking, that's just not logical or rational. So the idea of having to be the best at something to try it to begin with also doesn't make sense. But as adults, we're really trained, if you're not great at it, if you're not A+ or the best, you shouldn't do it. And I think that those ideas should definitely be changed because we're missing out on so many amazing opportunities for people to explore things and to try stuff out and to gain clarity and knowledge about themselves and potentially maybe create something in the world that can be helpful for someone else.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to recap a little bit, since we cut out a little bit over there, so you hit on education and how we tend to, creativity isn't really encouraged in our education, if I got that right. And then encouraging talent with our children no matter what, right? Because, and I've talked about this before on other calls with other women that we've interviewed for Work Bigger Stories, but I was told as a kid, like, you suck as a singer, you shouldn't sing. And I internalized a lot of that, and it translates to other areas of our life and work. So making sure that we're encouraging self-expression at a really young age, no matter what that looks like, because, maybe that person won't become the next Mariah Carey or Whitney Houston, but that could lead to developing that creative muscle. And then what I heard you say about adults is just hitting on the fear component, that many of us don't continue pursuing certain endeavors because around fear and perfectionism, which I think is such a problem. And I've now just come to really hate perfectionism. I used to be a perfectionist myself, and it really holds us back, I think, from just doing, exploring, and growing. Did I catch everything right?
Yep, exactly right.
Okay, amazing. And then I guess I have one more question around creativity. We talked about just how creativity solves some of the big problems that we're dealing with today. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do you feel like it can help us tackle some of these big issues? And then I want to get into racial bias, because I think that's very much connected with the work that you're doing as well.
Exactly. I think it's sort of twofold, because creativity really is this idea of making unconventional connections. And a lot of the problems that we face right now are very much about the status quo. The system isn't working, things are breaking down, people are scared, and they're like, what are we going to do? And one of the biggest ways to solve those kinds of problems is to think differently and make different connections in our system. And we can't really do that without creative thinking. And creative thinking is a process. So you can actually learn creative thinking, which is divergent thinking, being able to take different disparate ideas and put them together in an unconventional way. And you could get better at it. Like, the more that you talk about it, read about it, build that muscle, you can become somebody who's a better problem solver. And the more that we can actually get multiple people who have investment and ownership in that, the better. Also, the diversity aspect of it that's interesting to me is there's lots of studies about diverse inputs will give you a bigger output, right? Like, there's studies about teams when they're a huge range of backgrounds, they come up with better ideas because you just have more inputs and inspiration to pull from versus having a really narrow box or to play in, to ideate around. You can only do so much if you aren't as exposed to things, or if you're not bringing in other voices or other ideas. So just getting more people to feel ownership around thinking differently, making connections differently is really important to solving our problems. We can't expect people at the top, who are usually in place and have the power to make those changes, to do all of that in their own way, because there might be blind spots that they're missing. There might be a lack of motivation to solve some of those things because they don't feel the problem viscerally or don't experience it directly. And that's why I emphasize so much what would happen in the world if every single person felt some sort of creative ownership in their life. We would probably have a lot more solutions and be a bit more progressed in some of the issues that we face.
Yes, so I agree with you. I think creativity helps us find those unseen solutions. And I just want to share a couple of comments that are coming in from the group. Leah says, creativity for life, you know how I feel about it. Leah is one of the students in the Work Bigger program. And then Lindsay, hi Lindsay, so good to see you here. She says, creative thinking is a process. I say innovation is a process, not a thing, which I love as well. So yeah, so I want to change direction a little bit and talk about racial bias. Can you share, and we talked about this and for your interview on the blog, you talked about an experience you had, a personal experience, which was a big inspiration for the new quote, having to do with one of your old jobs, one of your old bosses. Can you share a little bit more about that now?
Yeah, how much time do you have? Racial bias is such a big topic, and obviously, coming from Utah and my background, I've experienced a lot of that since I was younger, and having to navigate really tough conversations and really tough situations from a young age. But especially with my work experiences in New York, I had a couple of things happen that really motivated me to think differently and to put my perspective out there. Before this boss, I actually had a few experiences where I'd be in a room and we're ideating and we're coming up with things, and I'd be the only person of color in the room. And I could see how much I would cause problems for thinking of different ideas, not glossing over or minimizing other types of ideas or reference points or inspiration. And that's problematic. If the people who are creating and building things, again, are only building in this really tiny play box or with this only specific set of ideas, we're missing huge opportunities. So I saw that multiple times. And so many, people of color are creating businesses now because we have more access than ever. We're in the information age. You can send a tweet to the other side of the world for little to no money. And so people are stepping up and putting their perspective out there and building a platform, but it's not really being covered. It's not really being talked about. And so I saw that gap and was like, how can I, elevate the story, elevate these other ideas about who's creating, who's innovating. I had, for instance, when I first started the New Quo, which was in 2014, it was really about minority entrepreneurship and highlighting those ideas and those stories. And I came across somebody who was only 24 years old. He was from St. Louis, Missouri, and had experienced a ton of things with, the shootings that have been happening and a lot of contention and racial tension in his city. He also had experienced a lot of death. A lot of his classmates had died from gun violence at different ways. And so what he started doing was coding obituaries because he wanted people to be able to have a commemorative way of having their family celebrate their lives. And from there, he built the skills to code and created a coding company where he's helping people around the world sort of injustices on the street when they see them. He's 24 years old. He has no money. Like, door for that story, and I felt support to and like, hey, I work in marketing. So let me tell a story. And then from there, the story that I mentioned in our interview specifically was really, I was getting about talking about these things and mentioned a nonprofit leader. The nonprofit I worked at was all about getting young people to be involved in social issues in the country and to volunteer. And so I was like, hey, did you know that there's a statistic about Black women specifically in lots of businesses? Like, there's times when we're like, start a business, then in your demographic, I think this is an opportunity. Here's the things I'm working on to elevate that story. And she was like, yeah, that's nail salons and hair shops. They're not really creating the next big tech thing like Mark Zuckerberg. And that just sort of stopped me in my back. I was like, how is this person who spends all of this time talking about giving back and helping people versus saying something like this? This is really problematic. And it just motivated me to be like, you know what? That's not true. I mean, there's so many stories that I can help tell in terms of people I know who are doing incredible things, who little to no money, and that's more impressive to somebody maybe more privileged is able to create something. But also the idea that I have the ability, or even if I am not necessarily somebody who has VC funding or certain access, to also create something impactful in the world and to prove this person and so many people who think like this person wrong. And so that kind of was like the tipping point of seeing all these instances of missed opportunity, of assumption, of minimizing other people's stories and experiences because they didn't get a certain paradigm or they didn't look a certain way. And it's, sometimes they say anger and injustice is one of the most motivating things. And I think that that can be true, where instead of letting those ideas and letting those limitations kind of stifle you and stunt you or really crush you, you take that and you turn it around and use it as motivation.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. You were cutting out there a little bit, so I want to make sure we recap for the group, because what you shared, I think, is so important in the meat of our conversation. So I'm going to mute you for 1 second just to make sure our connection is okay. But what I heard you say about the young man who built this coding business is really these stories aren't getting told, right? So we hear a lot about entrepreneurship, but what about stories of men of color, of women of color building all these solutions to massive problems? So would love to chat about that a little bit more. And then the story that you shared that you experienced on a personal note, what I remember you sharing in the interview is that this boss of yours, who is a big leader in the nonprofit world, a really influential person, has built her career around helping marginalized groups, but she's also made comments to you about that people of color or can only build certain types of businesses, and it is so limiting. So I just want to pause right there for a little bit to see if you can elaborate, again, just since you cut out, maybe share, from your perspective, how you're hoping to address some of these problems through the new quote. Maybe it's, making sure these stories are heard, but would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so just to recap more about the story of the young man. Yes, so I actually had stumbled across him from a friend. She was like, this guy's doing this incredible work. He has this same story that I think you should hear. And at the time, there was a ton of contention happening because of Trayvon Martin. And he essentially was really a part of that and in his town and his community. And he also had experienced a lot of gun violence with his, high school colleagues and classmates. So he decided to start coding, which is insane to think about. Someone that young, I think at the time he started, he was like 17, needing to do something like that for his community. But from there, he realized that coding was a tool that could give him a leg up and a way out of his community, and also to help and empower communities. So he started taking night classes. He had little to no money. He knew no one in his immediate community that worked in the tech field because there's a lot of insulation around tech and all of that, as a lot of us are very well aware of. And from there, he ended up building a company called Kylar, which is a huge coding company that now helps developing countries and people in those countries report street-level injustice. He also teaches coding to kids in schools and mostly focuses in the St. Louis, Missouri area, but has been in other places. He's helped Google and has been doing essentially a sort of in residency stay with Google and innovating on different types of coding. But you would never know this about him because, Forbes and Inc. and Fast Company aren't necessarily for $1 million, but he has an incredible story based on where he came from and the reason he had was to what he's doing now with his free time and how he's making an impact. And I felt at the time it was really important to tell that story because I find it much more motivating to see someone who has little to nothing really build something, even if it isn't making $1 bajillion or a ton of money. There's something inspiring and aspirational in that. And it also proves that there are a lot of everyday people who are doing really impactful things in their communities that should be highlighted and celebrated outside of the big, tech, Silicon Valley innovations that we see. And celebrating different types of solutions. Do we need another app that helps shoot your beer faster? Not necessarily. Do we need someone who can teach kids how to code in schools and how to get people to have some sort of advocacy against injustice on the street level? Absolutely. So there's that balance too, where what are these other programs and solutions that we're missing because we're not talking about them?
Yeah, absolutely. Lindsay says, yes, solve the real problems. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's really why we're all here, leveraging our work for something bigger and to start tackling some of these problems. I'd love to hear from your perspective, what can other groups do to start, just becoming more aware of unconscious bias and how it exists, and also to start, I guess, what, even if it's a small part, what can we do to contribute to the solution?
I think the first step is understanding that privilege doesn't mean you haven't struggled. Anytime we have conversations about privilege, people are like, well, I had to work and I walked 5 miles to school back and forth. Yes, that does not mean you did not struggle. The conversation is really, we all have various levels of privilege based on our race, our sexuality, our gender, our religion, our geography, our financial backgrounds, and those are something to keep in mind when you are creating, when you are, you know, interacting with people, when you are empathizing with other people's experiences. And so not getting defensive and feeling like you have to prove a point and saying, well, I've never been privileged, because maybe you don't know. A lot of privileges are not talked about. They're innate and they are subconscious. They are a default. That's why they're called privilege, because you may get that and not even realize that there's something in your experiences that gave you a leg up that other people do not have. The second one is realizing that just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean it's not true. Like this idea of, well, I've never experienced that. Like I've never been raped, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Torn zone or kind of death or tragedy, that doesn't mean that it's real. The conversation around bias and racial issues where people minimize it and dismiss it because they haven't experienced it. And that's problematic and dangerous because it lacks empathy and compassion. And I think people can have the capacity and build up the wherewithal to understand that even if you have not experienced something, it doesn't make it not true or not real. And listen to what people are telling you because they have experienced that thing directly. Don't discount it right away or minimize it in your quest of stabilizing the status quo or finding comfort. And the third thing I would say is just listen to people and be open to being wrong. Everybody can be wrong, even if you have the best intentions, you're progressive as ever, you voted for Obama. Those are all nice things, but that doesn't mean that you may not perpetuate certain problematic things in your day-to-day life or in your work. And that does not make you a bad person. This idea of like perfection, as we've talked about, isn't real. And we all have stumbling points, but the best thing we can do is to admit when we're wrong, to learn from it, and to turn it around when we can. And that takes constant education, exposure, and realizing that, you know, one of the things that could help us solve the system, we have to seek out for ourselves because we're not taught those things in school or in our families. Like even think about the history of racial bias in this country. A lot of people have historical amnesia. They don't know how the laws in our system was explicitly written out and laid out in a certain way where it benefited some groups and it really did not benefit other groups. And you can look back and read those laws and go into books and dig into it, but we're not really taught those things. So it's important to realize that, yeah, just because you don't know it doesn't mean it isn't true, and be open to reading it and exploring that. So those would be my biggest 3 tips for sure. And then the other thing, obviously, is to try to push yourself to step out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of people are, and it's also really an innate human quality to seek out sameness because it's comfortable. We all do it, where you want to curate the people around you to be very similar to you, to reflect the same sorts of attitudes and ideas. And I think sometimes, not necessarily saying like put a Trump supporter or something in your circle, but the idea of being open to experiencing other things and exploring other ideas that can help you learn and help you essentially expand your knowledge about stuff. Like, for instance, listening to music you typically wouldn't, or watching a documentary you would normally skip, or this sort of idea of pushing yourself to think a bit differently and expose yourself to a lot of different types of ideas, different sorts of creations. Those things can make you smarter and more knowledgeable and also give you new insights for things. And I think all of us can push ourselves to do that because the human brain is lazy and we want to do things as comfortable and as easy as possible. And we have to continuously push ourselves to step a bit outside of that comfort zone and to expose ourselves to things we typically wouldn't.
Yeah, I love that. And just what I'm hearing you say is really like the biggest thing I get from the 4 things you share is grounding ourselves in awareness and openness. So awareness of our privilege, awareness that we don't have access to every single experience, or we haven't experienced everything to be able to speak to it. And, you know, just because it hasn't happened to us doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And then, we have so much access now to information and to education, and really going out there and seeking the resources. It's available to all of us, right? It's on Google. So just educating ourselves right now, I think, is more important than ever. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to change a little bit of direction now, and I want to talk about starting a business while you're working full-time. I actually see this happening all the time in the Work Bigger community, whether we have a lot of women in the group who are in a 9 to 5 working for organizations they're excited about, but it just happens. A lot of people are starting side hustles, whether they want to be entrepreneurs in the long term or not, because there's so much value that you get from stepping outside of your everyday job. So can you share a little bit about what that process has been like for you?
For sure. And I'm, definitely by no means an expert in it. I'm still figuring it out. And the NEQA is not monetized yet. It's still sort of like a labor of love that I'm investing my own income into. But I would say the first thing is realizing that we have a lot of time that we probably waste and we don't realize it. And even if you set goals to really make that time your time, to invest in your ideas is really important. So I started scheduling so many hours per week, whether it was non-negotiable, where I would write or I would read or I would promote my site, whatever those things are. So you feel like you're eking away and sort of slowly chipping at this bigger picture. And you'd be surprised what you can get done in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months when you're dedicating 5, 10, 15, 20 hours per week in that free time to those goals and those ideas. Because we live right now in a society where there's so many people vying for your time and attention, whether it's, friends, family, your work, all the notifications you get across the many communication tools that we have, cell phones and email and Slack and G chat. Like there's all these distractions. And then we all easily distract ourselves because it's easy, and we all need to escape from day to day, whether that's like TV and food and whatever. And really being mindful and intentional has really been a learning lesson for me. And I've gotten so much more done when I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm writing tonight. I'm sitting down. This is non-negotiable. If I need to say no to something, I will say no, because I need to prioritize myself and my time and my creative outputs. And creativity in a lot of ways is honestly a solo process. You can learn so much from collaborating with people, and that's part of it too. But there's something to be said with solo mindful work where you need to sit down, try to minimize distractions, and let your mind process and let yourself create. Like it's a lot of people don't realize that so many entrepreneurs and creators spend a lot of time alone sitting down and making the stuff. It's the unsexy part of building any kind of business, is sitting down and doing that grunt work day after day after day. And you can easily do that in that free time in the morning, in evenings, on the weekend. And even if you don't achieve, 1 million subscribers in a year, you're still essentially moving forward towards that goal. And I always tell people too, that it's sort of it's a growing process. You can't build a company overnight. This idea of, I made a company and in 2 months it's got $100,000 in revenue. Like some people do have that success and that's great, but to expect that from yourself is kind of putting a lot of pressure, and maybe you won't make the decisions you'd like to make based on that sort of level of desperation. So I think it's important to be okay with setting goals that are a bit slower and longer term. And we live in a society where we want instant gratification and instant return. And, that's just not even possible. Like I tell people the story all the time about Uber, where when I first moved to New York City, I remember they had people handing out flyers, like begging them to download the app and you would get like 1 ride free. And I was like, what the hell is this? Like, why would I use Uber? And like, why would I be in someone's random car? At the time, everyone thought it was crazy. And they were on the ground guerrilla marketing. And now they're one of the biggest rideshare companies in the world. And people forget that hustle. Like even these major companies, it was a lot of grind and certain things they had to do over the years and pitfalls that we all forget as soon as like the sexy success is seen. So that's something to keep in mind, is you dedicating that time on the side in any way that you can in a consistent, persistent manner is the key. And also realizing too that if you don't necessarily want to do a full-fledged business, that's totally okay. I always tell people, don't put all your eggs in one employment basket. You can be, fired at any moment. And there's all these other factors that we think are safe when it comes to traditional work that is absolutely not true. And we need to teach people to learn how to diversify their sources of income, even if it's consulting on the side, renting out part of their home, whatever that source of income is that's independent from their company. So they do have a safety net. People who do have wealth have multiple streams of income. Very few of them have one direct source of income. So that's something to keep in mind. Even if it's like, I don't want to build a massive business, even having that second stream of income that you consistently have outside of your job is incredibly important. The third thing too is to define truly what you want out of the business. Some people definitely want to build a mega corporation and essentially do an IPO, or they have like a really big vision of what kind of company they have. And that also comes with certain considerations when it comes to the kind of work and the, monetization structure. If you're more interested in having a like expertise-based business where you share information, that's a little different. Maybe you don't want to scale it to a big corporation and have multiple employees, and that's okay. I think defining that for yourself is important, because then you can set appropriate goals. Not everybody wants to raise VC funds. I personally know people who have, and I've seen the pros and cons of it. And I didn't pick that path because I wanted to be able to have more creative control. There are some people who are like, I need that big windfall of cash now, and it's okay if I don't have 100% control because I have these scalability goals. So I think defining that for yourself early on allows you the freedom of really being intentional with your time and not chasing things that may not make sense or fit for your lifestyle. Like really understanding, what is my emotional motivations for these things? At the end goal and the picture that I get from this, will I be happy? And is this what I'm actually seeking? Or do I feel pressure to do that because that's what everyone does, And so I think defining that early on in the beginning stages for yourself can really help you define that free time and how you spend it.
I love it. I want to go back a little bit to the non-negotiables that you mentioned, right? So making time in your day, in your week, in your month to fit in these activities that help you make progress within you quo, because you are working full time, you have a life, you have so much else going on. How do you do that? Like, how do you stick to your non-negotiables? Like, what's the mental process, or even like your planning process?
I'm definitely still, I do some weeks better than others, but one thing that I try to always do is make some sort of weekly schedule. I'll sit down and say, these are the things I want to get done this week. And I've been trying to have a better consistent content schedule. So I know, okay, I'm going to publish this day every week. So I should spend this many days doing research, this day doing, social promotion. And I try to break it up into small portions so I can get a little bit done every day. And essentially, you'd be surprised how much you can get done even when you schedule it out in those tiny blocks of time. So I'll usually try to keep a weekly schedule. And it sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I've noticed that for myself, especially with writing and creating. Some people are better without a schedule and they like to create when they feel that impetus and that urge. But I do think of anything that I've learned, when you force yourself to create regularly, it really allows you to make a lot more and to also get past any fears or blocks that you have. Like pushing yourself, even if it's a daily 15-minute exercise or you're writing something 15 minutes every day, that's helped me a lot, because sometimes I'll generate new insights that can be stories that I can produce later. Sometimes I'll just get stuff out of my head that's in the way of creating, because I have so many other things and thoughts and emotions and feelings going on that need to be put somewhere and dumped somewhere, but maybe not necessarily published. So those two activities have really helped me a lot. I think also too, being accountable to others. I know that people are watching and following what I'm doing, and sometimes that really motivates me to be like, okay, what can I share this week that can be helpful or give them a different perspective? And it's not just about myself. It's really like these people have opted in to hear this message, and I should try to deliver something that can be of value to them. So that can be really motivating too, where, okay, there's somebody who's watching and listening. So I think sometimes being open and promoting yourself and putting yourself out there and just saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, hold you accountable, because you're like, okay, now I got to follow up. I said I was going to be producing a story this week, and now I have to do it. So I think those three things can be extremely helpful with producing and getting things off the ground. And just one other thing that I've done for myself too is focus on a few goals, because I'm, a solo person and building things on my own. So I can't do everything right now, but I want to do the biggest impact, the biggest bang for my buck. And for me, it's honing in on the message and the storytelling, which takes a lot of time, the writing, the research, the reading, and also building the community, which is about promotion and creating for other sites and reaching out to people. And those two goals for me are very important. There's a million other things I could be doing as well, but I try to dedicate like 80% of my time to those two, and then 20% to everything else, just because I know right now they're the most important based on the goals that I have. But that doesn't mean that I don't do those other things. It's just sort of putting more priorities on a few and less priorities on the other. And I think that can be helpful for people too, where you don't feel like you have to do everything, because that's overwhelming, and then you can kind of be paralyzed because there's too much to do. versus, okay, here's my 2 goals for the next quarter. Here's how I'm going to break them down into small, actionable things that I can do every week.
Yeah, less is more. And I love what you shared, that it's not about you. I think that's so important. And sometimes we tend to, well, I have a few thoughts on, like, I think ultimately when we're doing mission driven work, it's not about us, it's about something bigger than us. And I find that that really anchors us to push ahead with work that we just don't feel like doing, or when fear shows up. That's so important. So I love that you said that. I think the weekly schedule too is huge. And, keep it simple, like focus on 2 or 3 things, like you said.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to talk about a little bit more. So you said the importance of having multiple revenue streams. I think that's huge. I think, we have partnered with a financial gym in the past. Money is such an important topic, especially when it comes to women, because we don't, I feel like, embrace the power of having money enough. And I think we need to change the conversation around it. And I also love that you said that how important it is to create work that is authentic to you, right? So it may feel like, whatever kind of business you want to start, not coming from an ego-driven place, it's coming from that authentic place and really tuning into your feelings and emotions, because I feel like ultimately that's how we have the most impact. So I wanted to just feed that back to the audience, because I think those messages are super important. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, but I also want to ask, and we asked this on the blog too, for anyone on the call who is feeling stuck or working through a transition, they don't know where to get started, how to get started, like what advice do you have for them?
The first would be I actually have this quote on my phone, which I'll read to you because it's a really good reminder. It says, next time you're afraid to share ideas, remember someone once said in a meeting, oh, sorry, it cut out. It says, remember someone once said in a meeting, let's make a film with a tornado full of sharks. So I don't know if you remember Sharknado. It's a ridiculous film. There are sharks and tornadoes, and someone funded it. Someone pitched that. There are production that went into it and created it. And I think people have to remember that there's a lot of ideas out there that people are just brave enough to say, even if they sound completely absurd and ridiculous. And to not be so wrapped up in this analysis paralysis, because I think sometimes we can get so in our heads and wanting to look at every single little aspect of an idea, and we spend so much time thinking about it and we never create it. And I think it's much worse for us to do that versus, okay, do a bit of your preliminary research, get your bases down, and then just put it out there. Because a lot of the time you learn while you're creating it, and you get such precious feedback to see if it makes sense, to see if it's resonating with people. You can never create anything when it's always in your head. At some point, you've got to create something. And usually, in tech, they talk about this a lot, where it's sort of the this kind of really quick iteration of something just to see if it works. And if it fails, then they don't invest as much money and time in it. And it's better to do that versus building up something for 2 or 3 years. You release it and it doesn't make sense because you didn't do those preliminary tests and things that could have taught you something or helped you pivot. So if you're stuck, I would say push yourself this week to do one thing outside of your brain that creates that thing. If it's writing something, if it's reaching out to someone, if it's going to a talk or teaching yourself something that can get you one step closer, that generates something outside of yourself. Because there's always that very low-hanging fruit of the idea that you can then kind of build upon and make better. Like even the beginning iterations of my site were very basic. It was like, this is what it is. It doesn't look pretty. It looks nice, but it's not exactly where I want it to be design-wise. But I don't want to hold back sharing these messages because I'm waiting for the perfect design or waiting for the perfect technology. No one really cares. I mean, 10 years from now, they're not going to be like, remember when your site looked, jacked up 10 years ago? No one cares. So it's good to just start with something, that minimal viable product is what they say in the tech world, and go from there and know that it doesn't have to be perfect, but you should try something. Or you're not really creating, and then you should assess, is this something I really want to create? And what is my motivation to do it? Because if you believe in it enough, you'll feel that impetus and that motivation to just put it out there. If you have the belief of, this is a problem we need to solve, the solution that I'm thinking of for this problem is important to share, so I have to put it out there. And I think that's important to remember.
Had to unmute myself. Yeah, and what you're referring to also is everything that's taught in design thinking, which I think is so helpful. So I feel like even with like anything we create, when you have an idea and as you start to execute on it, it changes so much from that initial thought and what you think it should be, especially as you gather feedback. So I couldn't agree with you more. And Lindsay says negative feedback is about the product, not about you, which I completely agree. Thank you, Lindsay. I feel like when it's really hard to put our ideas out there, it can feel so vulnerable, but it's such an important process, like part of the process. And, you know, it's scary, but I agree with you. Like, just go and do it and get the feedback and put your idea out there, because it's going to iterate and it's going to change. And the faster you do that, the more time that you're saving ultimately. So we have,
I would say,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you were cutting out again.
I was just going to quickly mention that not all feedback is worth your time either. It's always important to remember that, is the feedback coming from somebody who can actually really teach me something, who has constructive criticism that can be helpful, or are they just intimidated and don't understand it? Because there's a lot of feedback that is generated from someone else's shortcomings or misunderstandings that have nothing to do with you and aren't helpful. So I think listening to all feedback sometimes is also not very wise, and you don't need to listen to everything everyone says. I think pick the people, especially your inner circle, who are going to keep it real with you and definitely have your best interests in mind. And the people you're trying to serve, those people will be very open and honest about their problems and the things that you're trying to help them with. And I think those two camps you should listen to. Everybody else is just noise in the background, quite honestly. You can't listen to everybody.
I agree. My favorite thing that taught in design thinking bootcamp that I participated in is, you know, feedback is a gift, so you can choose to take it or leave it, and I love that.
Exactly. Yep.
So we have just a couple of minutes left, and would love to hear from everyone who's on the call, anyone who's on Facebook Live, if there are any questions. Oh, thank you, Susie. Susie wrote motivated after the chat. Thank you for this incredibly useful conversation about the value of diverse experiences and perspectives. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. So we'll give it a minute. We'll see if there are any questions, but Christina, would also love for you to share how everyone can find you.
Yes, you can find me at my site, thenewquo.com. That's THENEWQUO.com. My email, which is hello@thenewquo.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at just my full name, Christina Blacken, or on Facebook, which is The New Quo. And I send out a story typically once a week and have an email list to share. And we'll be building some more stuff over the coming year, but would love to have more people hear these stories and sort of get their feedback on their own creativity and their process as we continue to build out how do we change this conversation and how do we change that statistic where people feel like creative potential isn't in their wheelhouse when it definitely is.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to share that with everyone too after the call. I'll share your contact info with our Facebook community. If you're not a part of that, would love to have you join. I'll also just send an email out with all of this. But thank you so much for your time, your insights. I've absolutely loved chatting with you. I think these conversations are so important, and would love to, just bring you into the Work Bigger community again. Everything you're doing is so valuable, and I'm such a fan of The New Quo. And I have to say, Christina is a phenomenal writer. I love reading your work. You just write so beautifully. So everyone, definitely subscribe to her platform. You're not going to regret it. But so grateful to you for your time and everything that you've shared on here.
Well, thank you for having me. I think Work Bigger and organizations like yours are so incredibly important. Thinking differently about how we're building our lives and our work is how the world is going to change. And so knowing people are part of this community and excited about doing it, that, gives me some hope and some optimism to know that we can change the status quo, and we don't have to sit back and allow the things that we aren't happy with to continue. And I'm just excited to share my story and to realize that people want to hear it. I went through a long phase of life where I felt like no one wants to hear this crap. No one wants to know my little poor story or whatever. But as I've continued to share that, I can see it can be helpful or give insights to people. And so I appreciate and really value time to share with
you. Thank you so much, Christina. Yeah, and I think that's it. I'm going to check one more time to see if any questions are coming in. There's a slight delay with Facebook Live, so is it okay if we hit you up after? Are there any additional questions from the audience?
Of course.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining. Again, I'll send a recap, and then, yeah, we'll see you soon. Thanks, Christina.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.